Hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us once again. Here we are, hard to believe, at our third and final session of Mapping Your Leadership Development Journey with Sarah Drummond. I want to thank you all for being with us. Thank you for your patience as we worked through a couple of technical things this morning today. And Sarah, thank you so much for putting this together and for all of the wisdom that you're sharing with us through this. So I know you've got a lot to get to. So without that, I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you, Kelly. And I echo my thanks that you have participated in this series of workshops up to this point. Today is the day we're going to try to put all of the pieces together, where we will discuss the first two sessions, and we'll also take time to look at a third area, and we will then do a little bit of knitting one with another. The hope is that in this last session, we will help you to identify where you have your hope for areas of growth in your own leadership development journey. So we've promised that you were going to have the chance to put some plans in place for your own leadership development. And today is the day where we're going to be the personal trainers who help you to engage in that workout. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you for our final slideshow. As you might have heard or gotten an announcement, I was having some technological problems this morning where I was getting this really annoying delay. And so I had to go out and come back in again. And I was remembering a time where something like that happened at a workshop with hundreds of people about 2.5 years ago. And the difference between then and now is that I knew I just had to reboot and shut up. 2.5 years ago, I tried to fix things. The reason I mention this to you now is that over the past few years, all of us have learned a lot through experience. And I think we also have learned to be much more generous with each other and hospitable toward the unknown. Now, maybe you were slamming your keyboard saying, "Where is my workshop?" But I have a feeling that you weren't that freaked out about the slight delay in our start, were you? Why? It's because we're growing, we are learning, and we are learning to accommodate the discomfort of the unknown. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. The slides that you're about to see are available now at Andover Newton's website. Kelly will send them to you later in the week as well. So I hope that you don't feel like you have to jot, except for jotting down your own thoughts and your own reflections. So let's review what has brought us to this point, friends. The first week we talked about a sought after skill, which is the skill of gathering content. In the second week, we talked about the skill of overcoming our own obstacles to lifelong learning. And we engaged that exploration of overcoming our blocks, our barriers to lifelong learning, using concepts from Bob Keegan's book, Immunity to Change. He and Lisa Leahy wrote a book about the way in which we make a commitment, but we have unspoken competing commitments that get in the way of our honoring that commitment. So often we know what it is we need to learn about leadership, but competing commitments, anything from busyness to fear that we don't know what we're talking about, or imposter syndrome, prevent us from grabbing on to the learning that would really benefit us. So we talked last week about overcoming competing commitments by acknowledging that which is keeping us from flourishing and finding strategies to deal with the unspoken competing commitment. We also talked last week about reflective practice. I only know a couple of jokes about theological education, which is unfortunate because I really do like to tell jokes. And one of those jokes is, what's the difference between 25 years of ministry experience and 1 year of ministry experience 25 times? reflective practice. Haha, it's a very funny joke. I can see you all just rolling on the floor laughing. The big difference between having an experience and learning from the experience is the intentional act of reflecting upon it, ideally with partners who are empathetic and caring listeners who can help us to make new knowledge out of lived experience, including our mistakes. I commended last week the discipline of identifying partners and forming relationships with partners so that as opportunities to reflect on lived experience emerge, we have a basis of trust where we have a place we can bring our reflections without fear of judgment or repercussion. Today's session, we are going to round out our circle. We talked first about content, namely information gathering in the face of leadership development needs. The second week, again, we talked about reflective practice. And today we're talking about horizon expansion. The lifelong learning leadership strategy of horizon expansion might include friendships across difference, travel and adventure, or learning about content that is totally unfamiliar to us and a field of anything where we feel safe and comfortable. The outcome focus that we will lean into today is integration. The hope is that you'll finish this session with the beginnings of a plan for your lifelong learning, including identifying activities where you're already engaged, but maybe not engaging it as a lifelong learning practice. So again, we spoke last week about competing commitments. And what you see here is the diagram that Keegan and Leahy use in their book, Immunity to Change. The main obstacles that prevent us from engaging in lifelong learning range from too busy, not enough resources, all the way to internalized barriers to lifelong learning. I'm going to trust that you are deeply familiar with why you have no time or money. None of us has enough time or money, but I am going to review those obstacles just one more time. One of the obstacles that many ministerial leaders encounter is the one that we might describe as cognitive dissonance. We also can find in education the expression null curriculum. Cognitive dissonance and null curriculum are both ways of explaining why it is that ministers get the impression that they're not supposed to need to learn anything about leadership. Cognitive dissonance suggests that when a minister says, I don't know how to deal with that, I don't know how to do with that, I don't know how to fix that, I don't know how to even begin to frame a question about that. The response they often get from people who trust them and people who project onto them immense, limitless knowledge is a look of confusion. The how could you not know that look. When we say, I have never encountered a case before where my ceiling of my sanctuary fell in, the person who's feeling anxious and upset will be disappointed, and they'll make that disappointment known. I've never had a case where there's somebody in my community who is on a sexual predator watch list, but wants to be deeply engaged. What do you mean you've never done that before? What do you mean you don't know what to do? Is a way that a person says to their ministers, I'm scared. But we often hear it as, you stink. You're terrible at your job. How could you not know that? That cognitive dissonance sometimes will create a barrier where we don't want to acknowledge how very much is surprising to us. Accompanying that is what educators call the null curriculum. If a professional school requires very little learning about leadership, we send a message that leadership is just not essential. It's not that important. Now, I'm not a proponent, even though I teach leadership, I'm not a proponent for turning the Master of Divinity into the MBA. But I do think that some leadership learning during seminary sets a good pattern for life. My hope with our students here at Andover Newton Seminary at Yale Divinity School is they take 2 or 3 classes in the School of Business, the Yale School of Management, so that they can learn how to learn. And when I'm asked, why so little? My first response is, well, they take 2 or 3 classes on the New Testament. And in the New Testament class, they might not do a deep dive into every single epistle and every single gospel. They might get an overview in one class and then maybe something more specific in another, but they learn the art of exegesis. And that's what I hope our students can do in their leadership learning. They might take one class in social enterprise management, but they now know how to look things up if they want to learn how to be a really good supervisor or learn how to be an adequate accountant for a CEO role. So again, the null curriculum suggests you don't really need to learn this because it's not in the curriculum. And most ministers come from a theological education that included little to no learning about leadership. As for the cognitive dissonance, we in ministry are not alone. Professionals experience the cognitive dissonance that comes with constituents' disappointment that we don't already know everything all the time. I encourage you, ask a doctor in your world, in your sphere, what does it feel like when you have to tell a patient, I don't know what's wrong with you? What is it like for a teacher in elementary school to have a kid they just can't get through to? It's disappointing. And those patients and the parents of that kid might not get it because they have projected onto the professional an omniscience that sometimes we buy into. This session is all about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Today's doctors and teachers and lawyers and journalists are encountering new challenges never before seen every single day. What's the difference between those who are flourishing and those who are miserable has a lot to do with their capacity to hang in there when they feel uncomfortable. So horizon expansion is an aphorism. I expand my horizons that's meant to describe looking at the world through a larger, wider lens than we once did. The opposite of an expansive horizon would be a very narrow outlook, where all we really know is where we feel our comfort zone is delineated. And for many people with whom I work, their comfort zones are extremely small. So horizon expansion is the intentional activity of broadening the scope so that we might feel less dependent on our narrow frame of reference or our narrow comfort zone. So I borrow the diagram to the right from scholarship by a thinker named Jack Mesereau. So Jack Mesereau, who wrote in the 70s and early 80s, coined the expression education for transformation. And some refer to Jack Mesereau as the parent of transformative education. So Jack Mesereau created this theoretical model, which you see depicted here. Now it begins to the kind of upper right quadrant with the disorienting dilemma. The first step for learning begins with feeling outside one's comfort zone, outside one's area of expertise. From the disorienting dilemma, we move into a time of deconstructing our assumptions, deconstructing what was making it impossible for us to feel comfortable. And then we integrate the new perspective by bringing the pieces back together again, but differently. Ken Poley, who writes about theological field education, supervised ministry, taught at Andover Newton years ago, he expresses the same sentiment using the term the cross-grained experience. So cross-grained meaning when you've got a piece of wood that doesn't feel smooth, you need to smooth the rough edges out. And we do that by connecting with that which is rough. not avoiding that which is rough. So just like sandpaper on a rough edge, we rub up against that which is rough as a means of smoothing off rough edges and coming to a new normal. So I'd like to share a story about a cross-grained experience that I had not that long ago, and it did not involve skydiving. So just know when you look at this image that, as far as I'm concerned, never would be too soon. About a little bit less than a year ago, my daughter took a trip, a very extended trip, and she invited me to join her. She's an adult, and she invited me to join her when she was going to be volunteering on a farm in Peru. So I said, okay. And I bought my plane tickets and I got ready to go. I bought my farm boots. They had steel toe. They're super cute. I got, new farmy kind of outfits, and I started brushing up on my Spanish. But as you might know, there was some political unrest in Peru last January, and that's when we were traveling. So at the last minute, we had to find a new setting to volunteer. And we ended up identifying an organization in the city into which we already had plane tickets that was not affected by the political situation, where my daughter and I ended up living and volunteering for 2.5 weeks in a home for children who could not stay with their parents for whatever reason. Even though we were there to serve, I came in with the mindset of a learner, and the number of times in any given day that I felt immensely uncomfortable was pretty astonishingly high. I also had the time of my life. I fell in love with 32 children. I really improved in my Spanish, really bonded with my daughter. Why am I sharing this with you? Because as I was going through this experience, what I did intentionally is every day I journaled about what is making me uncomfortable and how can I lean into it more deeply. One of the projects I engaged while I was there, we got to be great friends with the people who were the executive directors of this home for children. And one of the things that we volunteered to do, in addition to spending time with kids and keeping them entertained during what was their school break, we also rehabbed a classroom, my daughter and I took on the project of making curtains. I didn't know how to make curtains. I really didn't. I really, really didn't. I'm not saying that I sort of didn't know. I really didn't know. Like, I'm on Google. I'm calling my mother, learning how to make curtains. But every day I wanted to try something that made me uncomfortable, because I knew that what was most useful for my leadership development is getting out of my comfort zone of knowing answers, of knowing solutions. So I'm empathizing with you, but I'm also sharing with you that getting out of our comfort zone and expanding our horizons can take many different forms that don't include skydiving. So what do? We shake off the need to be knowledgeable, and we discover our gifts. We stoke emotions like fear of letting these kids down by not being able to make curtains for their classroom. Joy and satisfaction that come with, I got some gorgeous curtains made, but I also had lots of holes in my fingers after. At the same time, we avoid situations where we're learning at the expense of others. I might have been willing to learn how to make curtains on the job, but I wouldn't have done anything that would imperil the students' learning. I wouldn't have done anything that could have led to psychological harm. Kids don't care about curtains. And I didn't do anything except for maybe getting on a ladder that wasn't all that sturdy, didn't do anything that put anybody in physical danger. So here are some principles to live by when we think about choosing opportunities for transformational education, meaning education, lifelong learning that begins with a disorienting dilemma and then moves toward learning from that starting point. Friendships across differences. Of course, that friendship needs to be a mutual decision with mutual benefits. And I'm sure many of us have examples of ways in which we've broadened our horizons by forming an unlikely friendship. For example, I volunteer with the Integrated Refugee and Immigration Service here in New Haven as what's called a cultural companion. My whole volunteer job is I get matched up with specifically a woman, specifically a mother who's moved to this country as an asylee, and we make friends. It's a mutual decision. We mutually sign on for this kind of relationship. And I think that my horizons and her horizons are expanded as we do so. Travel and adventure. If you are physically able and financially able to travel and perhaps sign up for a course that takes us outdoors with proper safety and supervision, getting out of our comfort zone on purpose for many has been the most transformational of their experiences. It gives us physical demands where we can find out what we're really capable of. It challenges our assumptions about everything from what's an appropriate greeting to how does a light switch work. Having those assumptions stripped from us and then we have to reconstitute them helps us to have our assumptions stripped from us when we're in a typical board meeting. Content about the utterly unknown. I had a colleague, I worked with first-year students in a university where we had a number of advisors from the faculty. And one of the advisors was in his 70s and was, Nobel laureate level scholar who took a class at Harvard every semester for 45 years. And he would always try to pick something that was introductory, but completely different from anything else he'd ever known. Why? Because it expanded and broadened his horizons. And it also built his collegial relationships and his empathy. So we're going to take some time in small groups momentarily where we're going to do the ever promised mapping, the mapping of our practices. So here you see a diagram that I hope you take into your small groups. I would actually encourage you to jot it down on your notebook right now. Content, reflective practice, horizon, expansion. And in your mapping, I encourage you to write down what each separate practice might call upon you to do. So for example, content, maybe you need to read more about church growth. Maybe you need to read more about self-care. Maybe you need to read more about how does somebody start a nonprofit organization? That would be content. Reflective practice. Maybe you need to form a discipline with a friend that you're kind of calling off and on in a haphazard fashion to have a reflective practice, Havruta agreement with one partner. I don't know what you need. You know what you need. As for horizon expansion, maybe the reason you've been thinking about that trip or you've been thinking about that ropes course is not just because it sounds like fun. Maybe you sense that you need to broaden your horizons. So write it down. Now, there are some practices that fall into that overlapping terrain. I've already named volunteer service. My time in Peru, I was not there as a rescuer. I went there specifically in my mind as a learner and a mother. Those were my roles in my mind. Volunteer service can bring together all of the different forms of leadership learning we've discussed. And as long as we engage it ethically, never learning at the expense, never growing in our leadership at the expense of another, can be a very useful practice. Group travel, such as travel seminars and hobbies, are ways in which we can bring together different lifelong learning practices into one practice. I do want to say a word or two about conversation. I have a colleague named Diane Millis who wrote this book called Conversation, A Sacred Art. And I required doctoral students to read this book for a long time because what I found is that when they would get into research mode, they became really terrible conversation partners. Namely, they would be interviewing people or instructing people, but really forgot how to listen and talk in a fluid fashion. Conversation helps us to grow when we really listen deeply. It helps us to understand ourselves because we can actually overhear what we say to another person. And there is no better way to learn how to do something, a new skill or a new task, than having somebody walk us through it. So conversation, I think it's a sacred art, and it tends to be a lost art in our era of conversations that take place on a rectangle and never in real life dialogue. So the first session we were together, we discussed the whole concept of emergence. Emergence meaning the era in which we find ourselves, where leaders don't have clear destinations at which they might aim. And I made the argument in that first session that we need to find appropriate tensions between the various extremes of our leadership, and we need to do so with intentionality. I use some examples from my book, Intentional Leadership. Like, we need to find the right tension between serving the whole community and caring for individuals in the community. We might not be able to know what true north is, but we can monitor how our folks are doing as individuals and how our community is doing as a whole. We find the right tension, and we find the right kind of stasis amidst a time where destination is unknown. What I'm presenting here, by way of giving you this Venn diagram, is an opportunity for you to make a plan that gives you a chance to find adequate tension between the way you're investing in your knowledge of content, your engagement in reflective practice, and your ongoing practice of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So in small groups, I'm going to invite you to look at your current practices and also look at where there might be gaps. So the hope is that you're going to help each other both name your current practices and also name, I'm not seeing anything in my such and so circle. And maybe you can give each other some suggestions. So again, I'd like you to go into small groups. Megan's going to break us out in just a moment. And you'll have 15 minutes in your small groups to do this work. So I encourage you to give everybody a chance to share just one go round, and then maybe you engage in a conversation. Take it away. I hope that you had good discussions. Our group sure did. We're now going to take some time to share what we discerned we really need more of through a period of polling. And then we're going to have some time for discussion. And just so you remember, any questions or topics where you'd like to guide me to say more, please write to Kelly. So Kelly Morrissey, just send her a direct chat for any comments or questions. Meantime, we're going to do an unusual kind of debrief where Megan is going to put up some polling for us where we can identify what we want to do more. Okay, so the first question, when you consider the 3 lifelong learning strategies covered in these workshops, for which one do you feel the least resources are available to you now? Second, of what form of content, as in the first of our styles, content delivery would you be most likely to take advantage? What kind of blended opportunity would you take advantage of most likely? And if you were afforded an opportunity to engage in some kind of certificate program that blended some of these different learnings together into a certificate, would that motivate you? Yes, no, unsure, depends. So let's see. As more people participate, we'll see how these bars shift around. I can see the bars. Can you see them? Can everybody see the bars? No. Oh, I have an inside scoop. Okay, so please fill out your survey. And then I'm going to share verbally what you said. Once we get to, right now we've had 14 people participate, 15. Once I get to 18, I'm going to share the results, but I don't want anybody cheating. Okay, so here we go. The first question, when you consider the lifelong learning strategies, which one is not really abundantly available to you now? And half the people said that they don't really have a lot of opportunities to engage in reflective practice. The other half said they don't see a lot of opportunities around horizon expansion. And then a singular outlier said they don't have a lot of access to new content. That is the classic response of the internet age, where most people feel like where they don't have a lot of guidance has to do with not so much info, but rather integrative practices like reflection, like horizon expansion. Second, the question is, of what form of content delivery would you be most likely to take advantage? Nobody would go to a lecture online. Now that's fascinating for somebody in my job. Good to know. Short courses like this one, well, I mean, you are kind of self-selected, but you seem like you would do that again. That's good news. So 12 out of 15 said short courses. A couple of people said they would do a full course, like a 12-session course that was geared toward lifelong learning for leadership. And one person said they would go to a book presentation. So nobody wants the one-shots, looks like. What kind of blended lifelong learning would attract you? Interestingly, we had an even distribution between travel seminars, volunteer opportunities, and content-based discussion groups. So it does seem like there's different forms of collaborative learning that people would engage. And then as for the certificate program, 7 out of 15 said yes. And the other 8 participants were some combination of no, I'm not sure, it depends. So again, this is really useful information, and I wonder if it confirms or negates anything that you were assuming. So I'm going to close our poll now, and we're going to continue in our final phase of our discussion. So I wonder if folks could write into the chat write into the chat their thoughts on what they just learned in their small group discussion about what are the gaps? What do you see you really need? Love to see in the chat you sharing any thoughts about where are the gaps and what do you really need? And then finally, I'm going to share with you my bibliography from today. So I don't just make this stuff up, even though I make some of it up. And if you could write in the chat your thoughts on the gaps, take a mental picture of this bibliography, knowing that it is available at Andover Newton's website, and it will be distributed to you by Kelly. I'm going to stop my share and just open up the floor for any comments or questions that came by way of Kelly.
I have not gotten any questions yet.
Okay.
There's some chats coming in about what the gaps are based on: focus, educational professional background, personal experience. I wonder if people are thinking about organizational support. How well do your organizations support and encourage you to continue with lifelong learning? That's when I was in the church world, that was often one that came up for us.
Well, I really appreciate all the posts that people are laying out. I think that this self-selected group really is representative of those who feel like they need some structure and some container for their learning. And you wouldn't have signed up for this class if you didn't feel that way. I think that Amy points out that the gaps might have to do with educational background. I think that that's true to an extent. I also think that the farther I get into ministry, the world is changing much more quickly than I'm able to catch up. So even if a question came up that was where I had some relevant seminary learning, it was just too long ago. It was just too long ago. And the world has become so much more complicated. That said, I think in this era of emergence, people are getting more comfortable with saying, I don't know. People ask me, so what's happening with students? Do they want to go to seminary to be pastors, or what do they really want? My answer is, I don't know. Sarah, don't you talk to your students every day? Yeah, I still don't know. Because guess what? They don't know. And if I say that I know, but they don't know, people don't look at me as funny as they used to when I say that.
So someone asked a question about at convocation, how many lifelong learning opportunities will be available to alumni?
Yes.
Which is interesting. I don't have the convocation schedule in front of me. We'd be happy to include a link to it in the email that we send out, but there certainly are opportunities for learning. They are kind of those one session things that you guys said that you really didn't want, but they do have some of those opportunities available. Yes.
Taste and see workshops all day long.
Right.
Workshops all day long. And so YDS's alum convocation is next week, and it'll take place on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Andover Newton's big day there is Thursday, but there are opportunities throughout. Meantime, I just wonder if we could afford Kelly just a few minutes here at the end of our session to just offer any encouraging words from the Yale Divinity School Center for Continuing Education, which has hosted this event and which is here to serve you. So
Sure.
Kelly, any commercial?
Well, thank you. I will say that we are involved with one presentation during convocation, and it is with Allison Cunningham, who is a YDS alum, but also works in the Office of Supervised Ministries and Leadership. We're doing a session with her and a few pastors from the area who have been involved in a Lilly grant around reimagining church. And we're going to be talking with them about what that experience has been like, what things have they tried, what things have not been successful. And we will be recording that, and we will make it available to anyone who wants it through our website and through our Learning Beyond the Walls is the section of our webpage where you can find those types of things in the future, as well as links to Andover Newton lectures and other introductory courses. If you aren't an alumni and ever wondered what it's like to take an introductory course at YDS, we've recorded several of those, and they're available on the website as well. So between what we're capturing through the center, the Yale Bible Study Program, the Yale Youth Ministry Institute, we have a lot of free resources available to people up on the website. So thank you, Sarah, for giving me that opportunity to put that out there. And please feel free to reach out to me if anybody has any questions, or if anybody is looking for anything specific in terms of lifelong learning or anything you'd like to see us tackle, feel free to send me an email.
Thanks,
so with that, I just want to thank you all again. And I really want to thank Sarah for helping us to think about the importance of lifelong learning and how we can deal with some of the obstacles that might get in our own ways about that. But thank you all, and we hope to see you at future offerings and on campus. If you're an alumni, we look forward to seeing you at convocation.
Thanks, Kelly. God bless you and keep you. God's face shine on you and be gracious unto you. May God lift up the light of God's countenance upon you and grant you peace. Amen.